The Embraer 145 was fairly significant in Envoy's history. Back when we were American Eagle, the introduction of the 145 was a huge change. We're going to look at the introduction and the retirement of this revolutionary airplane today on Taking Off.
520.
Welcome to Taking Off. I'm Christy Wong. A quick thank you to our sponsors, like Flying Eyes, for helping us make videos like this, but more on them later. First, I want to tell you about an extraordinary trip that I got to take recently. I was invited to take a flight on one of the last Envoy 145s from DFW to its retirement home in the Arizona desert. To clarify, I was never a 145 pilot. I'm not type rated on the airplane, so I was only riding in the jump seat, which I'd never done on the 145 before. Being a 175 pilot, I was amazed at both the similarities and the differences on the 145 flight deck, and it got me wondering how these incredible airplanes came into development. The first question I had was, why are the 145 and the 175 so different? In order to understand the progression, I had to go back to the very beginning. Embraer is a fairly well-known airplane manufacturer from Brazil. In fact, the term Embraer comes from the term Empresa Brasileira de Aeronáutica. Okay, I know I'm totally butchering that pronunciation, so if anybody can help me, please comment below. The company was founded back in the 1940s and 1950s by a private investor, and it wasn't until the 1960s that the Brazilian government was like, hey, we like this idea, and they backed the company. The primary focus at that time was military aircraft. However, they produced just one regional aircraft back in 1968, the Embraer EMB 110 Bandeirante. It was a small twin-engine turboprop that could be used for civil and military use. It was small, seating just between 15 and 21 passengers, but it did really well overall. Between 1968 and 1990, Embraer produced around 500 of these Bandeirantes. Because of their success in the regional market, Embraer went on to produce the EMB 120 Brasilia in 1985. The 120 was larger and more updated than the 110. It could hold 30 passengers or be configured for cargo operations. Embraer saw success in exporting this airplane to U.S. regional carriers such as SkyWest. In fact, one of my first ever airline flights as a kid was on a SkyWest 120. In the late 1980s, Embraer engineers started working up an idea for a regional aircraft with turbofan engines instead of the very loud turboprops. Turbofans would be quieter and offer more comfort to the passengers. It would be faster, easier for pilots to operate, and improve overall maintenance upkeep. The idea was to effectively take the 120 Brasilia and slap a couple of turbofan engines on it. In fact, the original 145 design was not at all what we know the 145 to be. They had designed the engines on the 120 but over the wings. During the 1990s, the plane was redesigned several times to finally produce the 145 we have come to know and love. The turbofan engines were moved to the rear of the airplane and the wings were given a slight sweep back, and voila, the 145 was born. It was put into service in 1997 with ExpressJet being the premier customer. The 145 was an instant hit with regional carriers. It gave a 3-abreast cabin configuration, which is 2 seats on one side and 1 seat on the other side. And although small, it could carry up to 50 passengers. There was even a private jet variant built, which we all know as the Embraer Legacy 600. Altogether, over 1,200 of these planes were built all the way up until they stopped production in 2020. Now, when I say 145, I'm also including the 135 and 140, which are all under the same type rating. These were smaller variants of the 145 that were produced for specific carriers in the US due to scope clause at that time. Scope clause is an agreement between the airlines and their labor unions to limit the number of smaller regional planes in their fleet. Back then, scope clause dictated a limited number of 50-seat regional planes, so the 135 and 140 were produced to meet the demands of the carriers without violating their scope clause. It was perfect because these slightly smaller planes flew under the same type rating as the 145, so no additional training was needed for the pilots. The 135 first entered service in 1999 and could seat 37 passengers. Back in 1998, American Eagle was the wholly owned regional carrier for American Airlines. The regional picture looked a lot different than it does today. At the time, the carrier operated turboprop airplanes such as the ATR and the Saab 340. The primary focus of the regional was to get from larger hubs to much smaller airports that were typically not serviced by the larger jets. But with the introduction of the 145, these smaller regional airports could be serviced with speed and improved comfort. So on May 15th, 1998, the first American Eagle 145 took off out of Chicago O'Hare Airport. The 145 was a huge improvement for pilots who could now log jet time in their logbooks. I've spoken with several prior Eagle pilots who were around during the launch, and they've told me that this airplane brought improvements in flying and quality of life. A type rating in the 145 often opened up other paths for pilots wanting to move on into larger jet aircraft, and it was also just plain fun to fly. But back in the late 1990s, Embraer was already working on their next big project, their biggest one yet. They wanted a larger 70-seat airplane aptly named the EMB 170. Initially wanting to piggyback on the design of the 145, Embraer eventually scrapped the idea and started from scratch. They wanted to take everything they had put into their previous aircraft, but swap older technology with improved designs. They were also competing with Bombardier, who had launched the CRJ700 in 1997. With that, the improved, newly designed ERJ170 was announced at the Paris Air Show in 1999 as the new Embraer E-Jet family. The maiden test flight of the renamed ERJ170 occurred in 2002, with the first carrier, LOT Polish Airlines, being the first to fly commercial service in 2004. Is it LOT or LOT? I've heard it both ways, but if you know the official pronunciation, help me out and let me know in the comments. In February 2016, Envoy operated its first 175 flight out of Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. At the time, the company stated that the E-Jet platform was both the present and the future of Envoy, and that has come to fruition. After 25 years in service with Envoy, the 145 has been retired and made way for the 175. Now, I can't go without a special mention to the CRJ700, which Envoy operated between 2001 and 2019. It was also an important part of Envoy's history, but that's a story for another day. The final Envoy 145 flight happened this year on May 31st, landing at Chicago O'Hare and bringing the 145's journey full circle. Over the last 25 years in service, the 145 operated more than 4 million departures and served more than 150 million passengers. Not bad for the little jungle jet that pilots lovingly named this capable and fun jet from Brazil. Sometimes I'm asked why the 145 was replaced with the 175. And honestly, I think it comes down to the size of the aircraft and how many people it can carry, as well as how far it can go. We can get more people to their destinations on the 175 while still being able to serve the smaller regional airports. It holds more fuel and travels further, giving Envoy more options for destinations out of the hub airports. It should also be noted that the interior of the plane is larger and more comfortable for passengers, offering more overhead bin space. The 175 has the double bubble configuration, or 2 seats on each side of the cabin. But that's not to take away from the 145. There are other carriers who still fly the 145, so you'll see plenty of them in the skies for now. Many of the Envoy 145s have gone to these carriers. In fact, one of the other American Airlines wholly owned regionals, Piedmont Airlines, exclusively flies the 145 with American Eagle colors. For now, Envoy's 145s will be flown to the Arizona desert, where they will await their new homes. And Envoy ventures on with an all-175 fleet, which to this day is still growing. I feel very lucky to get to fly the 175 and am appreciative of the path that the 145 and its pilots paved to make it all happen. I'm a very proud Embraer pilot indeed. A very special thank you to Envoy, who let me ride along in the 145 jump seat during one of the last flights out to Arizona. I'd like to shout out the crew who patiently answered my questions and let me tag along. And I can't end this story without mentioning the heartwarming moment I witnessed as we were preparing to depart. As the first officer, Clifford, wrapped up his before takeoff checklist, and we were taking the runway for departure out of DFW, he gently patted the glare shield and said, "One last time, 663. It brought everything into perspective that these airplanes are more than just tools for our pilots. They become integrated in our daily lives, and they never leave us. The type ratings we carry and the experience we gain from these amazing machines become a big part of our history. It's a moment that I'll remember forever. Long live the Jungle Jet." Thank you to our sponsors for helping us make content like this. They are all pilots doing pilot things who also just happen to run awesome companies like Flying Eyes Optics and Colton Mortgage. You can find each of our sponsors listed in the description below along with their links. Supporting them helps support us. You can also support us by liking, subscribing, and sharing our content. We thank you all for watching. Fly safe, and we'll see you next time on Taking Off.